Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marco Schmidt, and I also welcome you all back. I hope you had a good lunch. And now, while you go through the digestion, you have the pleasure to hear a bit more about IPv6. First, a little bit about me. I'm working for the IPv6. I'm the manager of registration services. And I started at the IPv6 17 years ago. And short after I started, my organization launched an initiative which was called IPv6 Act Now. And it was because at this time we knew there would not be much more IPv4 to be distributed by the areas like the IPv6 soon. And a shortage of IPv4 was expected. So now, fast forward to today, so 17 years later. Actually, I want to ask the audience for something. Who of you works for a company that has deployed IPv6 at this moment? Oh, quite some hands, that's actually nice. And another question, who works for a company that plans to deploy IPv6? No more deployment plans. Okay, we hope we can change that. Actually, the amount that raised the hand is like 20–30% in the room, which matches roughly what we see on IPv6 deployment here in the Baltics. So that's already quite nice. And I hope that after this panel, a few more people will have ideas how and why to deploy IPv6. And to do that, I have invited here, and have the pleasure on the stage, three people with a lot of expertise on IPv6. So allow me to introduce them to you. We have Veronica McKillop. She is the founder and the chair of the UK IPv6 Council since 2014. And she has driven the IPv6 across different businesses. She was involved in the IPv6 implementation at Microsoft, and she currently runs her IPv6 consultancies to support enterprises on that topic. Then we have Wilhelm Böddinghaus. He's active with IPv6 since 2008. He led the IPv6 deployment in the German company Strato, which is a hosting provider, a very big one, you probably heard about it, and later founded his own company, Route 128 GmbH. And he is focusing on IPv6 migration for enterprises and public organizations. And he has a long time experience as a consultant, as a trainer, and as a member of the IPv6 Council of Germany. And last but not least, Andrei Chaletka, a colleague of mine, a technical expert at the IPv6 and former CSNet engineer. Andrei also promotes IPv6 and DNSSEC through training and talks worldwide and is helping organizations to adapt modern internet technologies. So now we're going to start. I'm also going to sit. I've standed enough. And of course, you want to probably know a little bit more about our three panelists. And Veronica, the first question for you. When did you hear first time about IPv6 and what was your reaction about it?
So first time really that it was during the course at Cisco Networking Academy. Maybe some guys, you have also attended this in the past. I'm not sure if the program is still running. But I remember at the time hearing about IPv6, first it looked weird, right, hexadecimal. But then I was excited because I thought, oh, this is going to solve our IPv4 address shortage. Of course, at the time, this is now nearly 20 years ago, I had no clue how is this going to go, but I was very excited about IPv6.
Thank you. And Willem, what was the strangest IPv6 myth that you have ever encountered?
Well, maybe it's not the strangest, but the oldest myth with IPv6 is that it is more secure than IPv4. It comes from the fact that we implemented IPsec together with IPv6, and each node who was able to speak IPv6 had to speak IPsec as well. That was changed. But it is a myth that is still running around. And we have to fight this. IPv4 is maturer than IPv6 is, of course, because it has been used for the last 40 years. But IPv6 is production ready, so we have to make it mature by using it.
Thank you. And Andrei, how did become IPv6 part of your professional life and of your daily work and in your career?
That's actually an interesting question. Well, I changed job to do IPv6. That was basically my part of it when I started working for SESnet, like 15 years ago. And one of the things I was really like, because I just read a book about IPv6 and I had this feeling, it will fix all the issues that we have with v4, and it's just a great thing, and I would really like to do it. And then I thought I was looking for a job, and then the REN network, the Research Education Network, is one of those that were usually like being the first in running v6. So they had an open position. So that's where I actually could use my theoretical knowledge in practice, and I enjoyed it.
That's great. By the way, I noticed I forgot one detail at the beginning. There will be an opportunity to ask at the end of this panel questions to the panelists. So please, if you have any questions during our talk, keep them in mind. And we are looking forward to hear them at the end. Now, looking back again, and that's a question for Wilhelm. Back in 2000 and in the early 2000s, there was a lot of talk in the ITF and so on, oh, IPv6, it will replace IPv4 within 10 years. Well, we know that did not happen, but why do you think this prediction failed or didn't work out?
IPv6 is a product from engineers and not from business. The engineer thought it would be a good idea that everyone changed to IPv6 because of the IPv4 address shortage. But the companies and the engineers never could imagine that, asked, how can we earn money with it? And the answer was, no, it costs extra and you don't need it, and you can still survive with NAT and with all this IPv4 stuff. So they never came to the idea to ask the vendors to do proper IPv6 features put them into their routers, into the software. We are still struggling with this today, but it was a mess 20 years ago. So nobody really could implement it. The first companies who could earn money with it or save money with it were the service providers. This is when IPv6 came into the mobile networks. But we engineers have to look where the money is. And there was no money in this game, so this game was not played at all.
And I think it is fair to say there were, especially at the beginning, a couple of misconceptions about IPv6, what it can do and what it will achieve. Andre, what do you think, what was one of the bigger or the biggest misconceptions in the early days?
I think it was mostly the idea that, we have this problem with IPv4, the address shortage, and we will solve it by deploying IPv6. So basically, today we have a problem with v4, so tomorrow we will deploy IPv6, and then our problem with IPv4 is gone. But well, that's not like it is. That, it's just like just the fact that basically IPv6 is different internet from the IPv4 internet, and we have to somehow transition the whole internet. That means that even if you cannot do it because you cannot force others to do it. And that is something that, like, I would say is the biggest misconception. People say, we don't need to do IPv6 because we have enough IPv4 addresses. Or the other, we don't need to do IPv6 because even if we don't have enough IPv4 addresses, it will not help us with that directly. But the problem is that everybody has to do it. And this brings us to we end up in the situation where IPv6 and IPv4 are not mutually exclusive. It's sort of like the opposite. You have to have both to be able to support everything that's happening on the internet, and the transitioning internet is in transitioning period for last 20 years maybe.
And yesterday when Paulius gave his presentation, he mentioned that also IPv6 has somehow a reputational issue, let's say. Veronica, when looking back, was there anything that could have been done differently to improve, to accelerate the adoption in the early days?
I think this is the same thing as we feel today. So probably would have helped if there were more government mandates. Some people might remember, I think it was by 2012 in the European Union, the government websites were supposed to be enabled with IPv6, but that never really had any teeth. There were really no sanctions if that didn't happen. Also, I think at the time, US government had some sort of a mandate, but they didn't have any clear roadmap. So I think that would have helped at the time. But at the same time, I understand governments have always lots of things to deal with, and some technology which doesn't have immediate, clear business benefit or for the economy can take a backstage. So that would have been it. Also, what I've seen for people who are looking at deployment, haven't deployed yet, the amount of transition technologies. I know the IETF is a very democratic organization and everybody has a say, but at the same time, we ended up with so many transition technologies that for people, in the end, it ended up being really hard to choose from, especially for the service providers. I think in the enterprise space, dual stack is kind of a clear option. That's always been the case from the beginning, like as the first step towards IPv6. But in the service provider space, if you look at it, a few years ago at the council, we even had a transition technologies workshop. So we had a half day dedicated to all these transition technologies, so people actually understood what they were about and how you can deploy them and choose one for your particular environment. So I think that choice, kind of lack of clear business case, but then everybody looks at each other like, so who should define that business case? Because we engineers, in general, we are not really thinking about the business. We are more interested in the technology. So you need to find somebody who is able to marry the two things together. Business and technology is able to give a clear message to the management, to the guys on the top, the guys who've got money, and then they are willing to allocate the budget and energy to this and people. Clear where it worked really well, for example, and this is now 13, 14 years ago, is Facebook. Facebook is very well known as being Europe for a very long time now, at least 14 years, that they have been running IPv6 in their network, mostly IPv6 only, really, because the scale at which they were growing and that they support users, billions of users around the globe, they couldn't have done it with IPv4. And at the time, but that's at the beginning, they were really an engineering company, So the engineers went to the engineering management and said, this makes sense. They say, yes, do it, but do it in the best way possible, right? So, however, 99% of enterprises are not engineering organizations. And that's why, as Wilhelm said at the beginning, it's multifaceted and it's not that easy. So I think everything has got the right time, right place. And that's, for example, why after 2019, we started to see much more growth with IPv6 adoption globally. But before, I think those three things would have helped. But was it the right time, right place?
Yeah, of course, in hindsight, it's always easy to find out. But I think we can agree that the original hype, the promises could not be fulfilled. But also, on the other hand, IPv6 is a success story. You just mentioned one, and actually, maybe also a question to Wilhelm, maybe also Andre, and afterwards, where do you see actually right now, where's IPv6 working well? So what is another success story there?
So it is working well in the service provider area. In mobile, we see the growth from there. If you see the statistics, 50% worldwide, 75% in Germany, 75% in France. If you see the statistics, it's all residential customers in mobile. It is not that much enterprises and in the state. So we have to change it there, and we still run into problems there. The service providers, they are engineering companies, like Veronica said, and they, even in Facebook, they build their own hardware. They know how to build software, and if they lack a feature, then they set 2 programmers a week in a chamber, and then they have it. But enterprises cannot do this. They rely on the vendors, and the vendors are slow. They need feature requests, and so generally, in networking equipment today, IPv6 runs fairly well. In the management system of this network equipment, there's still work to be done. software development is a mess. We have a lot of IPv4 there. So there it does not run really well. But enterprises and other organizations are forced to renew their networks. And I hear more and more that they want to do it with IPv6 and IPv6 underlay, and then they do IPv6 and IPv4 as an overlay. So this technology works. But then you have the last details, maybe it works up to 95%. And this makes it hard to implement. And then you go to the vendors and they say, well, we are not going to implement it in this version of the software, go to the cloud, and ask German federal agencies to go to the cloud. Well, no, this is not a good idea. So they have real problems there. This is still a real issue.
Thanks. Andre, would you like, maybe, can you think about other successful deployments?
Successful deployments of V6, well, I think we can mention mobile networks. They are sort of, it's quite funny because we have this training course in RIPE and CC for our members, and we are talking about IPv6 also, and there is this thing, and we had this thing that we said, yeah, in 4G there has to be IPv6 because of the number of phones. And then because it was before 4G was deployed, and there was always that, and most of deployments of 4G were without V6, and then we just changed it and we are saying something about 5G, and it's still like, yeah, 5G, lots of networks don't have V6, but at the same time, there's also lots of networks and also lots of users that are just using IPv6, and in lots of mobile networks, it's even IPv6 only. So chances are like, well, T-Mobile USA is very famous because they started with 2008 already, and some around 2012 they have already millions of users where they have no IPv4 ever on their phones, yet everything worked for the user. And that's also something I would say very important, that, well, there is no point asking users to ask for IPv6 because users really don't care. It's just like underlying problem somewhere like deep in the thing that people want is working service, but sometimes they don't realize that IPv6 is actually enabled for the properly working service because of the fundamental simplicity of network, where you don't have to have like carrier-grade NATs, which are big stateful devices, which are very hard to do on a scale in a high availability. And IPv6 doesn't need any of these. So that's the way, well, how users should want IPv6, but in an indirect way. They just want better service, and that's what IPv6 can give.
I forgot to mention when I said where does IPv6 run well, the operating systems that we have today. These operating systems, the main operating systems, all run IPv6 very well. This is Microsoft on the servers and on the clients. This is, of course, everything that comes from Apple. And the Linux operating system has been using IPv6 for decades. So this is also running very well, but the software on top, this usually is a problematic part.
I would add to that actually the web companies are the success story of IPv6 because they were the first ones to deploy. The trouble is when you use a large web company, be it Google, be it Amazon, YouTube was enabled with V6 very early, Facebook. The standard response is, oh, we are not the Facebook, we are not Google, So what is the use case for us? And I think so everybody has to look at their own business and how they are leveraging network connectivity to actually to generate revenue, right? Because the network is there, the service that provides, and it's very important for running the business, as we have learned in many cases in the recent weeks. Yeah, but I would say that is a big success story which came out of 2010 decade, where the web companies.
And indeed, when you shared the success stories, you also indicated already something that was also mentioned yesterday. There seems to be right now a bit of a coordination issue between hardware providers, software providers, ISPs to, let's say, to do the next step on IPv6. A lot of has been done. Is it You agree with that? And what could be done now in this stage? Maybe Wilhelm.
I think that is very complicated because everyone is playing its own game. Everyone wants to earn money, wants to do business, and there is no global coordination, and I don't think that we can coordinate it. But there can be, let's say we can build up some pressure. If you're running a large web portal today in Germany, where I live, and you don't offer IPv6 to the outside world, then you ignore 3/4 of your customers because they have IPv6 in the mobile and in the residential networks. So there is an advantage of doing it. And if you go to the vendors who do network equipment or do the management for the network equipment, you just must not buy their stuff. But sometimes you have no choice. I have a company in Germany I do consulting with. They have 200 switches and the management does not work with IPv6, and they will never get it because the company says, the vendor says, we are not going to implement IPv6 in this management solution. And the new management solution is in the cloud. It's not on-prem anymore. So either they stick with IPv4 or they have to exchange 200 switches. And they have no budget for it. They have no time for it. They did not plan for it. Of course, they will exchange these switches in the future, maybe in 3 or 4 years, but they have not planned for today. And they're not taking this money just to get IPv6 up and running. So I suppose we have to wait. And there is no coordination, and you can't force the vendors. Yeah? If you are large enough, if you're a US government, you can go to Cisco and others and can say, okay, I need this stuff. Then you have the buying power to move them. But if you are smaller, and 200 switches is small, then you don't have the buying power to make them move. And so there is no coordination. Everyone is playing its own game. Well, this is free economy, this is okay. But we are not. We don't live in an autocratic system where you can force people to move to IPv6. We have to convince them.
But I would like to to be a little bit more positive and optimistic. You gave an example of the US government. I think everybody benefits from that. In 2020, just for people who are not aware, November 2020, there was a can I say directive? But there was basically a mandate signed, which actually had a roadmap, had certain targets that need to be met. Some of it need to be met this month, 2025. And that had a very positive butterfly effect because the US government is a very large customer. Oh, what the mandates say. Basically, the federal government should be heading towards IPv6 only. In comparison to the previous mandate from like 10 years before that, there was no roadmap, there were no milestones, etc. This was different, so actually this really enabled the federal agencies to go and ask the vendors and say, we really need these features. Everybody benefits from that because everybody wants to sell, all the large vendors want to sell to the US government. Lots of money is spent there. So that means that it's a huge leverage that they have, and I think that's why it is important that the governments take some position on IPv6. But we have been seeing this in the last 2-3 years. There are dozens and dozens of countries, states around the world who now have their own mandates requesting that at least the public-facing services are IPv6 enabled or that the service providers deploy IPv6 because they realize that actually this enables digital economy. So I would say that, yeah, while there is nobody like a single body that organizes and coordinates everybody around the world, we can do still something in our own countries if we set our mind to it.
And I could actually add on to what you said, because from our own, it's like sort of so far it's like half success story. But at Ripen CC, we use, for employees, we use single sign-on solution as a service. It's called Okta. And this product is IPv4 only. It's an American product. And the fact that it's single sign-on and IPv4 only is actually blocking us from doing some IPv6 only deployments. So we reached out to them and asked them, we would like you to support IPv6. What do you think? And there was like a lot of silence. And then out of a sudden, like 6 months ago, they just approached us and say, hey, you are the only customers that are asking for V6. But, and they say, yeah, we would like to meet with you and do a pilot with you because, well, we don't really care about you as a customer, but we have lots of US governmental customers and they have this mandate and, and we definitely don't want to lose them. So, well, they probably didn't use these same words, but that was basically what they meant. So, in the end, like the US government, since then, nothing happened actually, but they still promised that they will catch up with us and maybe we will get IPv6 enabled on this service that is like crucial for us eventually. So, yeah, the mandates of governments are really like useful.
Yeah, I'm working a lot for the German government, and the German government is doing a lot of IPv6. I'm very thankful for that. And we recommend to all of the agencies to look into this RIPE document describing the features you should have in a tender. I think it's RIPE 776. And when we tell the vendors, well, we recommend to your customers that they look into this document. Oh, what is this document? Can we have a look at it? Can you explain to us? I said, well, this document is quite old. You should have read it, but they didn't do. So they feel that they have to put IPv6 in their products and not just can tick it off. IPv6 enabled, yeah, tick it off and then it's done. They really have to look into the features and yeah, that helps.
Yes. And one last question on the governments, because it's one government that made quite the news to be IPv6 supportive is the Czech government with an initiative. And maybe, Andre, I can ask you first, as you know it a bit better, how much has it driven the deployment? Has it positive effects?
I think there was like it came in stage. The first one was in 2008 already, and it was exactly just this like wishful thinking of the government that they just say every public service should be supporting V6, and then it ended there. And some of the public companies did that, but others just ignored it and nothing happened. So then they in 2023 they did the restart. Basically, and they passed a new governmental document, I don't know how it's called, which basically said, again, that everybody should be using IPv6. But more importantly, they also said, yes, we also want every public institution to stop using IPv4 by 6th of June 2032. So basically, not only you should start doing V6, but also you should stop doing V4, which already like sort of creates interest, because if people are just ignoring V6 and saying we are using V4 because whatever they say, yeah, you have like 3,000 more days before it stops working if you don't do anything, because yeah, I don't think nobody believes that it would happen. If it would have a significant impact, it can always be delayed. But just the fact that it's stated there is quite important. And of course, then as a remedy to what happened before, also the new document has this periodical reporting that every 6 months, basically there is analysis of the state, how the progress is going, which is going to the government every 6 months. So somebody at least has the job doing the monitoring part, and therefore asking the question, if somebody doesn't deploy V6, why do you don't do it? What do you need for that? Is there anything, you know, you need from, let's say, the government to progress with this? And this, hopefully, as I said, it's just 2 years old, and I really haven't heard any like details regarding how these status reports are going. But definitely the threat of turning off V4 by 2032 did cause some sort of like disturbance in the industry.
Earlier, William, you mentioned IPv6 statistics. For example, Google is measuring how many requests they get via IPv6, and globally this is increasing. We are scratching on the 50% actually that Google is measuring. So it is constantly going up, it's not stagnating. And looking more into the different regions, it seems that Asia is pulling ahead. We have India, I think, with 80%, Malaysia, I think 75%, China, which is not on Google, but there are other ways to measure, they are also around 50%. So what do you think, Veronica, why actually Asia seems to be pulling ahead, and is there maybe still something that we in Europe can learn from that?
Well, the first question we need to ask, how much V4 they actually got initially. You know, if you look at the size of the Asia-Pacific region, which probably represents, we talked about, was it like 40% or nearly
Even the half?
40%, half of the population on the earth, somewhere there. If you look at the two largest states, China and India, that's like 2.8 billion citizens, right? The IPv4 allocation wasn't that great, but at the same time, you know, when we were in these like early stages of IPv6 adoption, Asia Pacific wasn't moving forward because there was lots of CGNAT deployment. This is something we really don't feel much in Europe and in North America because the abundance of V4 assignment versus the number of citizens is actually quite generous. So we are not exposed to the complexity and the impact of carrier-grade NAT. While in Asia, it's typical in countries that basically there are 3-4 layers of carrier-grade NAT. So, anecdotal story, a friend was somewhere in Asia Pacific on holidays, let's say Indonesia. He couldn't connect back to his bank in Spain to submit tax payment because the session kept timing out. And the reason was because it was going through so many layers of NAT. He did some troubleshooting. So, it's a problem. Everybody looks at things from our own perspective. You know, we've got the blinders on our eyes, so we look at the perspective of Europe, perspective of US, especially in the US. Here in Europe, we are very focused on the US. We kind of keep forgetting there is a large portion of the world, very strong economy in Asia Pacific. So at first there was the CGNAT in Asia, but they basically get to an end. And then the deployment explodes with Reliance Jio in India, who basically deployed a brand new mobile network, and everybody got a cheap phone, 2G, 3G phones, and that was all with IPv6. That's why suddenly overnight India went to over 60%, now they are over 70%. In China, it's the government mandate. I have seen some reporting on it already, like in 2018, 2019, where basically they don't share much with the world outside. But if you follow that, basically there was a program where you see IPv6 as an opportunity to drive digital innovation, how to stand out as an economy and become a power in the global economy. And this is slowly changing in other countries, being Vietnam, you know, in Japan. Funny enough, some very advanced economies like Japan, they've been very long, just IPv4 walled gardens, but that all is changing now, and yeah, that is growing, and we will just see this continuing, you know.
Thank you. So yeah, and I think probably as the internet keeps on growing in Europe, we probably might be sooner or later in a similar situation.
The thing is, if you want to do business, if your companies want to do business, want to expand an Asia-Pacific market, which is a huge market, you probably need to be compliant. If there are representatives from banks, there are regulations in India, most likely also in China and other countries, and you will need to be able to deliver your services on IPv6.
And as we saw earlier, there are not many new deployment plans, at least here in the room. Still, and that's a question to all panelists, what should the companies here in the Baltics, in Lithuania, in Latvia, and in Estonia do to prepare for the future of the internet? Maybe.
What can they do? Well, first mentioned is always the lack of knowledge that you have to overcome. IPv6 is not taught at universities and schools. From my experience, from my son's studies of computer science, networking isn't taught. It's not about IPv6, it's about networking. The companies have to learn IPv6. But there we did some over-engineering. We told the companies, everyone has to be a full-fledged IPv6 engineer. So give us your IT people for many weeks of training, we will do this training. And they don't have anything in their daily work, do they? They're all bored, so they have enough time to come to our training. And this is not true. This does not work. We have to teach them enough to run IPv6. And then we might need in the larger companies a few specialists. This is from the learning perspective. Then we need management to help with IPv6. We need management attention. We need a sponsor in our projects who is from management trying to get any blocks away. You have to allocate money, you have to allocate time, and so you need support from the management. It can be started as a grassroots campaign, but there comes a time when you really need a support from the management. Get your IPv6 addresses. Here's your man. Huh? So there's plenty. And start working with it. Do some test labs, give IPv6 to your software developers, and then you can learn IPv6 in your organization, and then you can start deploying it one by one. Start small, start very small, but if you want to, you can do it quite easily, and then just do it.
Yes. And yes, I can confirm, if you need IPv6, if you're a member of the VIPE NCC, you just send a request, you don't have to justify anything, and you will get up to a /29, which is, in terms of /64, 8 times the whole IPv4 space. So yes, it's easy. And so education, convince your managers.
Yeah. And if you don't want to become a RIPE member, go to a RIPE member and this member can act as a sponsoring lure and can help you with getting IPv6 address space. It's unique in the world that we have a construct like this. So get your IPv6 space and get your project running.
Yeah. But maybe I would also add, it's quite related to what you said about education. What I see also is that maybe many of you who didn't raise their hand that you don't have plans and you don't have IPv6 right now, the chances are maybe IPv6 is providing a solution for the problems that you have, but you might not be aware of it. For instance, typical example, a service provider that is running like a broadband network with carrier-grade NAT, and then like with the time, the number of customers is growing, the speed of lines is growing, and the carrier-grade NAT has to be replaced with some that is more powerful because it doesn't scale enough, and it is super costly investment. And without enough knowledge, you might just end up with, what can we do? This is the only way how we can grow our business. We have to just buy a bigger and bigger and more expensive box because it's needed for bigger speeds for our customers. But maybe the solution is if you deployed IPv6 on the infrastructure that you already had, you could offload like 30% or 40% of your traffic outside of this carrier-grade NAT, and the same box that you have could now sustain a few more years because it will immediately get much less traffic going through it. And that's just the thing that, but you have to notice that such thing as IPv6 exists. If you just think like, we don't really need IPv6 because the whole world doesn't have IPv6, so we still need to support v4, so why would we bother with 2 protocols? That's like a real quote that I heard from people. Then we would just focus on the 1 protocol, but then you basically have this tunnel vision and you just go through the solution that you see as the only solution of your problem, but maybe it's not the case. Maybe you can actually have IPv6 as something that will help you forward.
Maybe also an information for the audience. I will now ask one more question to all 3 panelists, and afterwards will be for you the opportunity to ask questions, and then I will wrap it up, or we will wrap it up with a bit more information. But first, one question to all of you. We heard at the beginning that the predictions of the year 2000, what will happen to IPv6, failed, but still I want to now have you look into the crystal ball, into the magic crystal ball, looking forward in 5 to 10 years. What do you think, how will be the internet landscape, how will be the IPv6 landscape look in 5 to 10 years? Maybe.
Ladies first.
Thank you, Wilhelm. That's actually not that difficult from my perspective, because there is a seismic shift that is about to happen. Some people, I hope, have heard of IPv6 mostly, And by the way, there is a new draft in the IETF that Andre is also co-authoring, which is focused on the operational perspective of IPv6 mostly. This is a standard that became an RFC in 2019, and the takeoff in terms of deployment is unprecedented. And I think the time is right for it. As I say, we are at a point where something needs to happen, because with IPv6 currently you are doing dual stack, and before the only option was IPv6 only, where you have to remove v4 from your network in order to have only one protocol to manage, one protocol to secure. So dual stack is pain, v6 only is the holy grail. The trouble is there is so much in between in terms of, we always think only of the enterprises and office workers. Well, think of all the manufacturing plants, on the industrial infrastructure, power plants, everything that is somehow connected to networks. Are those systems, hospitals, like typical example, if you have ever been to a hospital, all those machines that are there, I can assure you they don't speak any v6. Because that's the last function they need. They need to look after you, those machines, not after some network connectivity, right? But this v6 mostly, which actually enables companies to create some sort of like IPv4 walled gardens where they can keep some parts of the network that need IPv4, but then moved majority to it to IPv6 only, basically. I think with the also soon coming support of 464 XLAT in Windows, full support, now you have it on mobile interfaces, but this is actually coming to non-mobile interfaces as well, hopefully in the foreseeable future. There's good support on Mac OS, obviously, iOS, Android, whatever you have I think Linux, yeah.
Hopefully.
Linux as well. So there actually is a very quick acceptance of this functionality, which is based on DHCP option 108. For those who are interested, but read about it or watch the talks by Jen Linkova on RIPE meetings or at the UK IPv6 Council. So that is actually preparing, it's opening the ground, opening the gates for anybody who wants to deploy IPv6 while maintaining some sort of v4, because you just can't switch it off or remove it. That's going to be a big shift. So I would hope that this actually accelerates the IPv6 adoption in enterprises, but maybe they come up with another excuse.
We will see.
I think IPv6 will have a tipping point, hopefully in the next 5 years, where everyone sees that using IPv6 is a big advantage. So just imagine if two companies want to exchange data, what would today the discussion would be? Okay, I'm using some 10 addresses from the RFC 1918. Oh, you're using the same addresses. So let's have some complicated nut solution in the middle. Hopefully in 5 years' time, one of the companies says, okay, if you want to exchange data with me, you have to speak IPv6, because I'm not going into this nut hell anymore, and I'm not going to invest in these nut boxes. They're expensive. We don't want to spend the electricity for them, and 1 watt of the box is another watt in the in climate in cooling. So we don't want to spend this money, and then hopefully this will be the tipping point. But I think we come to this. Especially if more governments put IPv6 in their networks, and then maybe the governments ask the economy, the companies, to do IPv6 to exchange data between companies and state networks. We will have more digitalization, hopefully. And then this will be much easier with IPv6, and if everyone sees the advantages, then hopefully in 5 years' time we will have a lot more of IPv6.
And Andre, what's your prediction?
Yeah, in 2012, when there was this word IPv6 launch, I was sort of like thinking, yeah, the IPv4 will not survive 2020. That's like 8 years. That's like so far in the future. It's just impossible for, and here we are, 2025, and we are hoping that we will get to 50% in this graph. We are like hypnotizing the graph to go at 0.8 so we can finally say yes, IPv6 traffic to Google went over 50%. So I'm pretty sure there is an extremely long tail. I'm pretty sure IPv4 will be there for the next maybe 50 years. But the question is, how relevant would it be? And here, I actually have to say, from my home networking, you can expect that my home network is not a typical network. I'm actually running IPv6 only network at home for like years already. And from time to time, it happened that actually I have IPv4 outage, that IPv4 didn't work. And the thing is, I didn't notice at the first moment, you know, everything looked normal. I searched something on Google, it worked. I watched some videos on YouTube, it worked. So basically, it actually took me some while to figure out that something is wrong, because I was just thinking, then I clicked on the link on Google search result, and it just showed me error. I thought, oh, this web page is down maybe. And then when it was the third and fourth, I was figuring out, okay, maybe something is wrong with my computer. So I think this is exactly the way how it will be forward. You know, the IPv4 will still be there, but its relevance is going to decline slowly, up to the fact that you would say, oh, yeah, something doesn't work, maybe IPv4 is out again, but yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not a critical service anymore. I still like, you know, I can get along nicely with just IPv6, and that's basically what is going to happen. And I just wanted to plug, because you said nicely about the IPv6 mostly, I wanted to say, an invitation, please come visit RIPE Meeting, because at RIPE Meeting, we run the RIPE Meeting Wi-Fi network, and it was the first sort of like public network that ran on IPv6 mostly. So you can see it on your own computer, on your own device, how it works and how your devices can work without any v4 address, and yet everything works like normal, so yeah, come visit.
Exactly. The next RIPE meeting, by the way, is in about 4 weeks in Bucharest in Romania, so not so far away from here. But now actually it's your chance, so if there are any questions, I see there's a hand. Yes, the microphone is on its way.
Hello, this is Alexi from Finland. I'd like to offer a couple of success stories, if it's possible, for areas that weren't mentioned. So you already mentioned that mobile operators are very good at adopting IPv6 and hyperscalers are very good. You didn't mention cable access network operators. They are also very good at providing IPv6 connectivity. But on the other side, for small hosting providers, I used to work for a company called Sci-Fi Communications in the 90s. And back then, well, we still had only IPv4, but we noticed that load balancing using DNS round-robin produced a very even load on the IP addresses in the round-robin. And then when we bought our first dedicated load balancer, it didn't do as well. How that translates to today is you can't afford to waste a lot of or spend a lot of IPv4 addresses on load balancing, so you need the dedicated load balancing. But on IPv6, you can spend IP addresses with gay abandon on load balancing. So that is one small success story for small providers, hosting providers specifically. And then I've been working with some enterprises as a consultant, and when they start thinking about where to test IPv6, I usually first tell the guest Wi-Fi network, because that is usually the lowest priority network. Make that IPv6 mostly, or at least dual stack. And then when they ask, when would it be the right time to go IPv6 only? I usually tell, probably on your sort of production networks, it's a long way off, but every enterprise tends to have a few things that are actually pretty easy to move IPv6 only. Those are things that are only used in-house, like print services, file sharing services, or network disks or whatever. Those are always in-house. You control all the devices that need to interface with it, and you can make those IPv6 only relatively easy, especially if you use Microsoft products or Linux products.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Yeah. back on then.
Hi, this is Oliver from IP Info. So I've heard you talking a bit about kind of the requirements that governments might put in place to increase the adoption of IPv6. What are your thoughts on RIRs trying to increase the adoption of IPv6, maybe kind of setting an end date, trying to reclaim IPv4 addresses? I mean, might be controversial, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
I'm not
Marco,
answering
I
that.
think it's for you, isn't it?
Well, actually, first I'm curious what you have to say.
I don't think this will work because it's about business, and we still have a lot of machinery that doesn't speak IPv6. If you look into the medical sector in hospitals, if you look into production plants, we still have IPv4, and it will be needed for a long time. So I don't think there can be any pressure. We need to do the communication with all of our customers and partners who still have to use IPv4 for some reason or choose to use IPv4. So forcing does not work. The regional registries are doing a lot. They are giving out IPv6, and you always get enough addresses. So there's no shortage. This is really helpful. The RIPE NCC has their own training, so they try to educate. You can do some 2 IPv6 certificates. They are promoting it, but there are many people who don't want to listen. Maybe they have to feel the pain in the end when they have to do the transition to IPv6 very, very fast. But forcing does not work. It's a global network. Even if one country would say we do IPv6 only, yeah, well, let's do it. The others won't do.
Yeah, just to add to that, from the point of the RIPE NCC, indeed, what William said is completely correct. We do quite something to raise the awareness, to promote. Andre is working in the Learning and Development Department. We're going to events. But of course, our role as a registry is not to enforce things. We do enforce policies, right? Policies, it's true, but we cannot tell people how to run the network. We cannot tell people you have to give us back the IPv4 and you must deploy IPv6, because that would clearly overstepping our boundaries, our mandate, and that cannot be the goal of us. But we get these questions quite regularly. It's being discussed. Hey, there's unused IPv4, you should take it back, and so on. But yeah, I think that's not what we are there for. And
maybe I should a little bit add, because this is my favorite topic, and that's the thing that people always struggle, because our company is called RIPE NCC, and people just call us RIPE. But this is the place where it's good to explain the difference. We are RIPE NCC, we are the registry, but we don't set up the rules. Who set up the rules? The RIPE community set up the rules. And the question, who is the RIPE community? You all are RIPE community. Everybody, every living being on this planet is a RIPE community. So basically, and the rules are set up by consensus. So if you really want us to recover IPv4 addresses, go and reach consensus in address policy working group. That's how the rules that we play with are set up. And good luck with that. I don't think it will happen. It's like, because consensus means that you will address all the arguments, and yeah, I don't think this will fly.
I think there was one more question, Mike.
Hey guys, Paulius Sudickas, BalticNOG IPXO. I have quite a few questions, actually. Well, not questions, it's not too often to see all 4 of you on a single stage. So first of all, huge honor to have you here. So I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on a couple of things. So set aside RIRs and their rules or directives. Do you think governments or even, well, bigger unions should, I don't want to use the word enforce, but push businesses towards migration to IPv6, or this is something that market should figure out itself and, well, users itself?
I personally think that by doing IPv6, governments do a lot to promote IPv6 because they set an example. And maybe they encourage others to do communication with the government via IPv6. But I think it's a little bit problematic if you think about what can governments do. Look how large and how diverse the RIPE region is. So it goes from Reykjavik to Vladivostok, and this goes from Norway to Arabia, and we have so many different political systems. RIPE NCC has to be neutral, and there is not the government. I think in many countries the governments should just set an example, or maybe in all, but they are not. Maybe they are not doing. Maybe I think in Saudi Arabia the regulatory authority made sure that IPv6 is being implemented. They have the power to do so. If you look at the German regulatory authority, they don't have the power. So this is different in all of the countries. There is not the government.
I would say, there are so many standards, like ISOs, for example. One ISO 27001, is that the one? Do the auditors ask about IPv6? Do they know what IPv6 is? And that's a gripe against like NIST, all the different standards that we are using, be it for security, being in the financial industry. So I think if you are saying governments should do something, maybe it's that way, influencing the industry bodies that actually create the regulations. And they, for example, I know in banking industry, it's another private internet. The whole system around the planet, everything is on private IPv4, lots of layers of nodes. What happens? We will have a talk about IPv6 only IXP in the future. But what about a stock exchange in a small African country or Asian country, which will be V6 only? How are you going to trade with them if you want to do business? So I think the governments, what they could do instead of like direct imposing of something, they can do it for the agencies. So like in Germany, we've got a fantastic example, the US, some other countries, right? But then the telco regulators can work with the ISPs. Somewhere it's not necessary. For example, in France, they achieved 85% without any obvious regulation. But then the governments could influence the industry bodies to create these standards and make these requirements to advance themselves. I agree with Wilhelm that direct government interference, I disagree with that, and I don't think it's going to be effective. And our governments have got other things to worry about.
I might say that, I would say, we are here in the EU, and EU has lots of regulations, and it has lots of complicated system that basically analyzes the market, whether the market solve the issue itself or not. And we see that definitely with V4, there is an issues on market because the whole IP address market is showing that the access to IPv4 resources is not like equal for everyone. People have to trade them for money. So it might open, and so in that case, maybe the proper regulation is in place. So the one thing is like threatening for turning off V4, as I said, in Czechia. But of course, it's always really tricky to get to like the right level of regulation to not to over-regulate. That's always the tricky part.
Okay, thanks. So from your experience, and this is something that Wilhelm, Veronica mentioned, sometimes IPv6 becomes a hard sell for your management, especially for old enterprises in the States and Western Europe. From your experience, what's the best selling point? If I were to be, a NetOp or network engineer, I walk up to our CEO, CTO, whatever, what's my pitch?
What's your line of business? Because the pitch is gonna differ.
Manufacturer. I'm a car manufacturer.
You're probably deploying cloud. Your car manufacturing division wants to deploy cloud, and you can't use your private addresses, or you're illegally using someone else's IPv4 space, and you can't announce it within the cloud instance that you've got. And all of a sudden, you have an incentive to deploy IPv6. Of course, we've got a problem. Right now, the cloud providers are not ready for V6 only. Right now, and I hear it from many people, and of course, I partnered with Microsoft Azure when I worked at Microsoft IT. There is still need for some IPv4. That's because of the backend, and the orchestration automation is still V4. But the time's gonna come when those VNets can be V6 only. So you want to move to use cloud, and all of a sudden you have no choice. And I have seen this with some of my customers, where basically this is the main driver. Cloud adoption is the main driver for them to start deploying IPv6.
I can add to this. The demand in the product. Car manufacturing is just one of the products. But today, sometimes, let's say, a forklift, they are not sold anymore, but you pay for them by lifted weight and driven meters. So they need a lot of communication from forklift to the building where they are deployed in. And maybe this is IPv6, if a customer demands IPv6 there. So it comes from the product. And this is the only way to get enterprises to adopt. And of course, communication with your partners, with other companies, with your customers, with your supply chain. And if you have to buy from India and you cannot communicate via IPv4 to your partner in India, then maybe it's time to implement IPv6.
And we are almost out of time, so I would suggest, Paulus, and anybody else, if you have more questions to our panelists, you can find them in the coffee break. And just with a request for a short answer, a question to all of you. If the audience should take one thing away about IPv6 from this panel, what would it be? And with the same order, first, Veronica.
When I used to speak at Cisco Live years ago, I'd say that deploying IPv6 is like running a marathon or training for a marathon. Now, but at the time I wasn't a marathon runner. Now I am, and I can tell you it's like training for an ultra marathon and then running it. So unless you run it, you will not know how it feels. It is long, it is painful, you will have highs and lows, but just do it. The technology is there is support. Yes, implementations are not perfect, but only thanks to your deployments, we will uncover the problems and we will fix them and move on, So just do it.
Thank you. Wilhelm?
Yeah, just do it. This is the right phrase. From my perspective, IPv6 is not that hard anymore than it was a few years ago, because many of your components run IPv6. We can solve the security issues. Be courageous, do it, start with it. This would be the one takeaway. It's not the right time to just think about IPv6. Do IPv6.
And I just shortly think out of the box, maybe IPv6 is solution for your problems that you are not aware of.
That is a very good closing word. So then thank you so much for the attention, and thank you for the panelists. Thank you.